The Nothing Phone 1 is finally here, and so is NothingOS, their skin of Android. I haven't tried the phone for myself yet, but according to pretty much everyone who has it, it's pretty smooth and responsive. Great. But there's a problem. NothingOS is almost identical to stock Android essentially, which doesn't look bad at all, but it doesn't match their brand identity. I guess it's because they had to ship the phone as soon as possible and they haven't had much time to implement their aesthetic into the software, because I'm sure they've designed a lot more stuff than what we've seen. But eventually, over time, they have to fully apply their style to the skin. So here's a concept of what I think NothingOS 2, or a future version of NothingOS in general, could be. The first thing they can change to make the experience feel a lot more unique and consistent is the icon pack, and I have a very strong opinion on how it could become. As of now, NothingOS is just using the standard Android icon pack, which is probably the one thing that fits their aesthetic the least. Apps are, at the very least, self-contained. Even if an app doesn't match the overall style of the UI of the phone, if it is at least internally consistent, it will not look out of place. But when you are on the home screen, the various icons will inevitably be compared. Usually the problem arises with third-party apps, as they probably won't bother adapting their icons to all the various skins, but in the specific case of NothingOS, many pre-installed apps don't even match the pre-installed widgets. But what if I told you that precisely because of Nothing's aesthetic, there may be a solution that could make their icon pack the most consistent out of them all? Their brand has a specific element that works perfectly for icons and symbols of any kind: the dots. They've already used them for some of the widgets they made, and they work pretty well, but for icons I think it would make even more sense. The template I'm envisioning is this: each icon should be circular, with a grid of dots in the center. The grid should accommodate for 11 dots horizontally and vertically, which is not a completely random number, it's just what I've seen them using in the widgets, both the final ones and the ones they teased. The background as well as the dots themselves should only use flat colors, because I haven't seen them using gradients anywhere. I made a couple of icons to show you how they would look like, and I think they look pretty good. But they look pretty good is not the only reason why I think this is the best solution. The Google Play Store has millions of apps. Even the biggest icon packs have nowhere near that many icons, and while the most popular apps are usually covered, there always is that one app that you have to use every once in a while that only you, the developer, and the developer's mother have installed. Most of the times, that one very niche app will always look out of place, sometimes even relative to the general Android aesthetic. But the template I envision is incredibly simple. So simple in fact that Nothing can make a tool to design icons in that style, and once they have the tool, they just have to release it to the public. What I'm envisioning is not just another icon pack with a weird style, it's an icon pack that's curated and expanded by the community. So if you do have that one weird app that nobody else uses, and it bothers you that it doesn't fit in with the rest of your home screen, you can just make it yourself. And once you've made something you're satisfied with, you could share it to the rest of the community for everyone else to download. It wouldn't be easy to create such an infrastructure, and honestly, I don't even know if it would be legal or possible. But if it is, I think it would be a great solution, and one that perfectly matches the ideals of Nothing. So the icons are obviously very important to create a consistent experience, but that's not all it takes. They also have to make the apps, you know? As far as I'm aware, the only apps that actually follow their style are the voice recorder, the camera, and the settings, in the sense that it uses like the dotted font once and that's it. And it's a shame because they've shown they can make some really cool stuff. So I tried to design some more apps in that style. I had already published a tiny concept of the phone app. Since then I changed a couple of things, mainly the colors and the tab bar at the bottom, but the idea is generally this. Exactly how in the voice recording app there's the analog element of a tape recorder that can be physically interacted with to go back or forward in the recording, in my concept you have an old rotary phone. It would have been cool to have the dial pad be in the shape of a rotary dial, but it was immensely stupid, so I settled for having the handset be usable to close the call by swiping downwards. I also had a couple other ideas for apps using this aesthetic, which are a music player, obviously. In this case the analog element is the vinyl at the top. You can obviously go back and forward by swiping on a vinyl, and there's a button that can be used to change some audio settings. I wanted to differentiate the buttons. The most important ones are full, while the lesser used ones only have an outline. But because of this differentiation, to indicate when something has been toggled, like when you add a specific song to the favorites, I couldn't simply make the whole button white, as it would have broken the visual hierarchy. So I came out with this tiny dot. It serves the purpose of indicating that something has happened to the button, but it doesn't distract too much. And the inspiration this time came from keyboards and how the caps lock keys signal their status. The other app I made is a redesign of the clock. In the original version, there's a section with all the various time zones, including your own. I didn't remove any of this stuff, obviously, but below the digital clock that shows your time zone, I added an analog clock that copies what the digital one shows essentially. And the purpose of having an analog clock you can barely even read is mainly to justify the padding. With smartphone screens becoming bigger and bigger, and the Nothing Phone 1 has a 6.5-inch display, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to actually use the phones. Elements at the top of the screen are simply more difficult to reach, and using phones one-handed is becoming almost impossible. Samsung recognized this problem, and in their Android skin, One UI, they offer a solution, which is this massive padding in many apps. They call it the viewing area, that ensures that everything the user can interact with is easily tappable with one hand, and that's great. But it looks kinda bad. That's the point of the analog clock. It serves the same function as the viewing area, but it gives a bit more personality to each section. I also redesigned the timer. The basic Google one looks like this, and it's fine, but in my concept I replaced the circle with an hourglass, which doesn't just fit the whole idea and aesthetic of analog things, but it's actually more precise, because it has 200 dots, 100 per half. Each dot represents 1% of the timer, so it'll be a lot easier to tell exactly how much time has passed. And speaking of the passing of time, I think there's an opportunity that's waiting to be used, and it has to do with the glyph. The glyph is considered by many a pure gimmick, something that's just there to look different. And while I agree that it was definitely designed, at least partially, with the intention of helping the phone stand out and be recognizable, I don't think it's necessarily useless. The idea of the glyph is that it's essentially the halfway point between an always on display and just not seeing notifications at all. By placing the phone upside down, it creates an additional small obstacle to using it and losing hours of your life on Instagram. It can still tell you some important info, but it'll make it less likely you will want to actively use the phone. And that's all great, but there's a very obvious thing the glyph could do that, as far as I know, it's still not there. The glyph, and to be more specific, this part here, and you'll see why shortly, could be used to display timers or progress bars. Like, let's say you're listening to a podcast, but you don't want to be distracted by social networks because you're also working. Instead of showing the progress bar on the screen, it could be displayed on the glyph. The same goes for timers, obviously. The reason why I specifically chose this little bar instead of the gigantic G-shaped LED in the center is that the former is way more predictable. Imagine the progress bar starts here and ends here. Can you easily tell at which point you've reached 50% or any other percent for that matter? If it was a circle, there wouldn't be a problem, but this is the shape they chose. With the little bar, on the other hand, it's way easier to tell. Anyway, even if nothing of what I proposed today were to become reality, it was still a fun style exercise. And if you liked it, I have many more on this channel, like this one. Check it out if you want. Ciao!